Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for Cybersecuring America, our shared responsibility. We are the National Cybersecurity Alliance. We're a nonprofit that stands for the safe and secure use of all technology. We encourage everyone to do their part to prevent digital wrongdoing of any kind. We build strong partnerships, educate, and inspire all to take action to protect themselves, their families, organizations, and nations. Only together can we realize a more secure, interconnected world. Cybersecurity efforts require a well-coordinated public-private approach to ensure that every part of our interconnected society is secure. Elected officials, government leaders, industry executives have all come together today to discuss this whole of society approach vital to cybersecuring our nation. We're also here in honor of the 18th Annual Cybersecurity Awareness Month, of which we're the founders, co-led by the National Cybersecurity Alliance and the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, also known as CISA. The theme of this month is Do Your Part, Be Cyber Smart. All month long, we're sharing cyber best practices and advice for staying safe and secure at home, at work, and at school. You can learn more about the month on our website, StaySafeOnline.org, what I like to call the world's best URL. I'd now like to welcome Kirsten Todd, Chief of Staff from CISA. Kirsten?
Thanks so much, Lisa. It's great to be with you.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for joining us. So given the continued trend established during COVID, more and more students have been learning from home. So what are the biggest cybersecurity threats as a result of this dynamic?
Well, it's a great question. And first, I just want to thank you and the NCSA for your partnership. I've been in this space for 19 years, 20 years, so know the work that you have done for this month. And it's great, I think today in particular, to see the inflection point that we're at with cybersecurity and just the momentum around even just the awareness of a month like this. Certainly in the past, those of us that have been in this space know how difficult it's been to kind of get some traction and awareness. And for better or for worse, we've had a year that has certainly touched Americans very much where they live, where they work, where they get their gas. If we look at Colonial Pipeline, JBS Meat Supply, but importantly, what you've said with COVID. I think the work from home, what the pandemic has done to work from home, it meant that the network boundaries of companies went beyond the brick and mortar branch office to kitchen tables to home offices that we all experienced. And that really increased the threat landscape. And so what that meant was we were now putting real responsibility and pressure on individuals to do their part. So going to this first week about do your part, be cyber smart, the pandemic really has brought that home. The good news in all of this is that the ability for individuals to take control of their cyber hygiene and their cyber readiness is actually pretty straightforward. We're really focusing this year from CISA this month on what the basics are. We're really emphasizing multi-factor authentication. I was talking with a global CISO yesterday who said, if we could just eliminate single-factor authentication by 2025, the impact that would have on our global cyber readiness would be significant, as well as software updates, strong passphrases, these basics. But they've become more important now than ever because of the interconnectedness of our work from home environment.
Yeah, I absolutely agree about the basics. I think it's often overlooked how effective just doing the basics would be, the massive dent we could make if we just encouraged a few simple behaviors and talking about it in ways with the American public that tell you that this isn't complicated, right? This is easy. So what new cybersecurity trends have you seen over the past year?
Well, certainly ransomware and phishing. I think, there's been such an uptick in ransomware over the last couple of years because it truly is a malicious activity that has taken advantage of these expanding boundaries of networks. We're all working from home, we're multitasking, and the ability to really stay focused on looking at an email, and particularly when early on there was a lot of surge capacity crisis management. If people were getting a fake email from a CEO saying, wire this money now because of this, there was less critical thinking going into it. That's human nature. And the malicious actors it's been easy for them to take advantage of this environment. And so ransomware obviously has been a big issue. I think one of the things that's important though about ransomware is what can be done to address it. And I'll take just a moment, because this is really about strong authentication. It's, we talk about backing up your data. That's absolutely critical, but it's the malicious actors getting on the network, and strong authentication, a strong passphrase, multi-factor authentication. These basics will be enough to certainly minimize and dissuade malicious actors. I'll use Colonial Pipeline again, because I think it's important, just because it was a big company. The way that the malicious actor got in wasn't through something sophisticated. They took advantage of the lack of multi-factor authentication and not and a vulnerability that hadn't been patched. These are things that you or I could do from our home. So it's an important reminder that, again, that doing the basics is critical. The other real event that we've seen is phishing. And phishing is that ability to take advantage of somebody not paying attention to a link, clicking on a link without knowing it. Our motto around here is think before you click, which is pretty straightforward. It doesn't require a lot of memory, but it is just taking that extra moment. Is this somebody that you know? Does the email look normal? And if you don't know where the link is coming from, don't click on it. I'll also just mention, we're seeing a lot more mobile phishing attempts. So those texts that you're seeing, click on here to get account information, click on here to get your updated bill. Those are more challenging because it's harder to determine where they come from. But just remember that, the analog way of picking up a phone and trying to reach out to somebody is an important second layer of authentication that we should be executing today.
Right. Your point about multi-factor authentication, we do some annual research that CISA sponsors that's available on our website now. And over 50% of the people that we surveyed have never heard of multi-factor authentication. I don't think we've done ourselves any favor with the term, because it's complex. But what was interesting, what was really encouraging, is that of the people who've heard of it and who've used it, 90% of them continue to use it. So if we can change that habit, if we can nudge people in that direction, it's got staying power, right?
Absolutely.
What have you seen in cybersecurity lately that's surprising you?
So I think, as we look at the threat and where things are going, one of the key issues is truly what individuals can do to make a difference. Recognizing that while we look at cybersecurity, and to your point about terms like multi-factor, and again, another person in the industry said even cyber is abstract in an understanding of what this is. But cybersecurity is really about human behavior. And if we can focus on educating individuals to what their role is, their accountability and responsibility in cyber, we can go a long way. And I think that understanding is a little bit of a surprise in the evolution of our understanding of the space. I mean, I think about, we've heard the analogies about bike helmets and seatbelts, but you talk about the culture and how people are continuing to use multi-factor, those who have started it. That's about cultural awareness and cultural readiness and building that into our well-being. The generation of children that grew up wearing a seatbelt don't think twice about it. Those that didn't grow up wearing a seatbelt still think about it when they put it on, because it wasn't something that was ingrained. So we have the opportunity, we call it K through Gray. Director Easterly is really pushing this point. As we're raising this next generation, it's being able to bring those tools and those resources and that education into the culture that we're building, because it has to be a culture of safety and a culture of security.
Yep, I love that. K through Gray. So let's boil the ocean a little bit. What are those top actions that you think everybody should take? So we've mentioned multi-factor authentication. What else?
Software updates. We think of them as being inconvenient because people don't want to walk away from their computer for 10 or 15 minutes, but it's so critical. And I think, choose your analogy. It's not a Band-Aid. It's, you're in a boat. Someone told you there's a hole. You've just got to patch it. Otherwise the boat's going to sink. And it's something that's so simple. I mean, that's the good news is that the companies that have built the operating systems, that build the patch, make it pretty easy for us to do that. And that's why setting auto update can be a very simple way to address that. You don't even have to think about it. It'll happen automatically. Strong passwords, passphrases. The National Institute of Standards and Technology comes forth to say you don't need a bunch of characters and numbers. A passphrase that is 15 characters or more is absolutely something that is sufficient and is strong to be able to ward off vulnerability compromises that happen through identity. We look a lot here at CISA at incident response planning, because really in cybersecurity, it's not about preventing everything. We know that there will be breaches, that there will be malicious actors that are one step ahead. that shouldn't deter us. It actually should empower us to recognize that part of success comes from the ability to manage that disruption and mitigate the impact so that your continuity of operations aren't disrupted. I was talking with a security individual at a bank in Switzerland a couple of years ago, and I asked her the question about quantitative metrics, because we always talk about how difficult it is to measure success in cyber. And I said, how do you measure your success? And she said, I don't measure my success by what I prevent. I measure my success by how I respond when something happens. And I think that's just very critical. So we shouldn't be dissuaded when something happens, but it's our ability to manage that event.
Right. What about advice for people that are using smart home devices, tips for those people that are using things like Alexa and Google Home and Ring and Nest, all those toys that people have in their homes these days?
Yeah. Well, so make sure you've got a secure network, a secure VPN. And, we love interconnectedness because it makes our life easy. But it's important to note that, if you can turn your lights off from 3,000 miles away, it means that somebody else can get to that place as well. So it's an eyes wide open environment. It's a risk management environment. For some, if you travel a lot, those types of tools are very critical. But I think everybody has to make the risk management choices that suit their risk profile, their risk tolerance. But just to recognize that everything can have a vulnerability, but you can manage that according to what you want and what makes your life operate more effectively.
Yeah, just a reminder for everybody too, we've got lots of tip sheets on connected home devices and everything else that Ms. Todd has talked about on StaySafeOnline.org. So let's pivot a minute and talk about the career issue in cybersecurity, better known as the workforce gap. What resources are available to help individuals learn more about potential careers in cybersecurity? Because we all know we need folks. What's there to help people to change their career path or to want to go in this direction? It's such an exciting field.
Yeah. Well, so first I'll make the plug for CISA to join the CISA team. If you want to, we have a QR code. The director is talking about figuring out how to permanently put that on our documents, but perhaps even just a temporary tattoo so we can walk around and recruit the workforce wherever we are. But certainly with CISA, but importantly, as we look at partnerships with universities, community colleges, high schools, and one of the things that CISA is very focused on is engaging with organizations that can train and educate individuals on cybersecurity. I'm a big proponent that cyber is not just a math and science issue. When we build out the workforce, we need individuals with lots of aptitudes, science, technology, but sociology, psychology, history. That we have. It is an interdisciplinary problem. It's an interdisciplinary issue. So that means that it mandates really capabilities and aptitudes across many, many skill sets and disciplines. And so if you're interested in this space, believe in your ability and work with the organizations around you, again, the educational institutions, government as well, to be able to find that match of your skill set with the need in the cyber workforce.
Yeah, I mean, I have a marketing background, so if I can do it, then certainly room for people with soft skills in cybersecurity. So absolutely. Along those lines, what hands-on learning activities are available or opportunities are available for those K through 12 students?
So CISA is working a lot with schools and has developed a lot of materials to start with the primary and secondary education on how to educate students on the basics. I mean, I'm a believer that when you are given an iPad as a first grader to learn how to read, you should also be told what phishing is. You should be told and taught multi-factor authentication, because as we've determined, it's one of the reasons why recommendations are, if you want to teach a child a second language, do it when they're young, because the mind is so big and broad. And I think that certainly holds true for cybersecurity. So CISA has a lot of resources. We're working with educational institutions. You can find these resources online on our website. We also have specific resources for Cybersecurity Awareness Month on the website that are all available. But I think what we're starting to see are these institutions do more to invest in this for their students.
Yeah, I completely agree. As teachers are teaching kids how to use new technology, there should always be security kept in mind. We should be teaching them to use
absolutely
securely. The younger we start, the better. Absolutely, yeah. So you touched on it just a little bit. Where can people go to learn more about Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and how can they get involved?
So on our website, CISA.gov /cybersecurity-awareness-month, We never make it easy on ourselves with any of this. But also we have stopransomware.gov, but we have resources on the website that talk about the 4 things you need to do. We've talked about the multi-factor authentication, incident reporting, authentication, strong passphrases. Fortunately, we're seeing a lot of resources, both our partners in the nonprofit space as well, that are providing very accessible tools. You mentioned this earlier, Lisa. We've got to be able to break this down into bite-sized pieces. We talk about the analogy with cars. We all don't need to be car mechanics to take care of our cars. We know what it means to look at the oil, to make sure there's air in our tires. The same basics need to really hold true in cybersecurity. And the resources at CISA are really targeted at making them very accessible.
Fantastic. I also see some people putting links in the chat. So that's
The
great.
more the merrier. This is, as our director says often, this is a team sport. And one of the things that we're really focused on this year is to bring the great work of nonprofits, of other organizations together and have CISA be a platform where we can convene these so that we create greater visibility for the tremendous work of various organizations across the country.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I'll put in another plug for StaySafeOnline.org and
absolutely.
Leah on the team, if you wouldn't mind putting in the chat, or Justin, our new education resource page. We've got that as a resource as well. But that's just amplifying other people's efforts because there's so much out there, but it can be hard to find. Yep. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Lisa, and thanks for your continued partnership, and have fun this month. It's a great month, and there's a lot of visibility to the important work that you're doing.
It's our Super Bowl. We love it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now I'd like to welcome Representative Congresswoman Yvette Clarke to the stage, please.
Well, greetings, everyone. I'm Congresswoman Yvette D. Clarke, and I proudly represent New York's 9th District in Central and South Brooklyn. Permit me a brief moment to thank the National Cybersecurity Alliance, Lisa and her team, for the privilege of speaking with you all today. As many of you know, I serve as the chairwoman of the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Protection and Innovation Subcommittee on the Homeland Security Committee. What some of you may not know is that I served as chair of this subcommittee just over 10 years ago. And since that time, the National Protection and Programs Directorate has become the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, known as CISA. Congress has empowered the Department of Homeland Security to better execute to its federal network security mission, including through the use of binding operational directives and persistent threat hunting. And numerous executive orders and presidential policy directives have sought to provide clarity on how federal departments and agencies should work together to secure public and private networks for cyber attacks. Nevertheless, recent cyber incidents, from SolarWinds to Colonial Pipeline to the breach of the water treatment facility in Oldsmar, Florida, serve as a stark reminder that progress has come at an unacceptably slow pace. 10 years ago, my subcommittee held hearings on defending federal networks from sophisticated foreign adversaries, protecting our electric grid and other critical infrastructure from cyber attack, and clarifying the cybersecurity roles and responsibilities of entities across the federal government. If I were to hold those same hearings today, I'm concerned that we wouldn't represent a decade's worth of progress. On top of that, there are new challenges to confront, from election security to supply chain security. So as chair of the Cybersecurity Subcommittee on the Homeland Security Committee, my goal is to harness the legislative momentum of this moment and turn it into sound cybersecurity policy that will result in meaningful cybersecurity benefits. I've spent the first half of the 117th Congress focused on providing resources to state and local governments to improve their cybersecurity posture by introducing HR 3138, the State and Local Cybersecurity Act, and working on legislation to mandate cyber incident reporting, also known as HR 5440, the Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act of 2021. And I'm pleased with how these bills have progressed through the legislative process, and I'm fully committed to getting them across the finish line. Let me be clear, ensuring they do is an exigent necessity to this country. The evidence is clear. Our adversaries are aware of America's cyber deficiencies and are eager to exploit them. They will only continue to target these shortcomings if we do not address them immediately. We need to modernize our federal network security programs, which, as currently deployed, are not suited to prevent or identify a SolarWinds style compromise. The SolarWinds compromise was not a result of a failure of imagination. It was a failure to stay ahead of our adversaries. We must invest in research and development today and in the future to improve and continue to evolve our federal network security programs. We must raise the baseline cybersecurity posture across government entities and the private sector to reduce avoidable opportunistic attacks so that we can focus our talent, time, and resources on preventing, detecting, and eliminating more sophisticated attacks. Raising the nation's baseline cybersecurity posture will require a systemic approach to cybersecurity. We need a comprehensive approach which accounts for cybersecurity at every point, from any individual's data to our federal level. All that remains is to capitalize on the effective, meaningful solutions to these issues which exist within the chambers of Congress. We have bipartisan commitments and we have legislative willpower. We cannot afford to let either go to waste, and I don't intend to. So let me thank you for allowing me to join today's very pivotal conversation. You can stay updated on my legislative efforts by following me on my social media at Rep. Yvette Clarke and signing up for my newsletter at clark.house.gov/newsletter. And let me just say, based on the previous conversation that we just had, cyber hygiene is just so very, very important. And the lessons that we are learning really has to do with vigilance on our part and understanding how inextricably linked our virtual lives are to our physical world lives. And we can all do our part during this month of cybersecurity awareness and education to strengthen and undergird our ability to remain preeminent on the globe and protect ourselves, our families, and by extension, our communities and our nation by doing simple things in cyber hygiene to make it so. So thank you once again for having me, Lisa. It's great to be with you. And thank you for your commitment to cybersecurity.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Clarke. Thank you for the important work that you're doing. Thank you for joining us today.
Absolutely.
Now we're going to hear from my friend and former board member, Jeff Green. He's Chief Cyber Response and Policy, National Security Council at the White House. Thank you for joining us today, Jeff.
Great, thanks, Lisa. Everyone hear me okay? I just want to make sure, audio check. Great. Really appreciate the chance to be here. As Lisa talked about, I have some experience with the NCSA, so it's a particular honor. I'm going to talk briefly about some of the administration priorities and then more importantly, why they are priorities in cyber. So there are really three key elements to our cybersecurity strategy. The first is building back better to make sure we're modernizing defenses. Second is returning to the international stage on cyber issues with like-minded allies and partners. And finally, ensuring that the United States, both public and private, is better postured to compete globally. Underlying all of these really is one thought, that we need to shift our approach from response to prevention. We have effectively in the past few years come to accept that we will be in a constant state of response, and we think it's particularly important to step back and challenge whether that has to be the case and see what we can do to try to shift it. Right now, the cost of insecure technology is really borne at the end by incident response and by cleanup and effectively by the victims. But it's really more than just the monetary cost. There is lost privacy, there is stolen PII, there's the emotional impact on citizens and the potential for loss of trust in the digital economy. There's increased threat to our critical infrastructure, which we've seen over the past few months. And finally, from the chair I sit in, there's the loss of information that really is essential to our national security. The bottom line is that it will cost us a lot less if we build things right from the outset. We're looking to have security be a basic consideration, whether it's software security, network security, or individual hygiene. So looking at what we've done in the first year or so of the administration, I'll name a few. In April, we began the Industrial Control System Cybersecurity Initiative. In May, the President signed the Cybersecurity Executive Order, EO 14028. Then in July, the President signed a National Security Memorandum on improving cybersecurity for critical infrastructure control systems. August, we hosted a public summit with a variety of private sector companies. And then next week, we are going to be hosting an international ransomware event with 30 different partners. So as you might imagine, there's a few things going on to keep us busy. And against all of that, the backdrop, there have been just a couple of incidents over the past year or so. My third day here was Hafnium, the Microsoft Exchange vulnerability. So that was a great welcome to the NSC. And then obviously there have been some pretty big ticket ransomware incidents. There was Colonial Pipeline, JBS Foods, CISA. So that's kept us focused and helped us understand why we're doing what we do. Part of that effort and a big part of my day job the past few months has been the ransomware effort. It really is a whole of government effort, looking at what we can do to both drive improvement in our security and to try to inflict some pain on the ransomware actors themselves. I'll take a second and talk a little bit about the executive order that the President signed in May, because I think there are pieces of it that touch on a lot of the issues I talked about. Fundamentally this is focused on the federal government systems, improving our information sharing and the security of our networks. But a big part of that is partnerships with the private sector, with government vendors, ensuring that we get the information that we need about both incidents and potential incidents. We put the burden on agencies to fully deploy really core foundational technologies, some of which Kirsten talked about earlier, particularly multi-factor authentication, making sure encryption is widely and effectively deployed, and similarly looking at cutting-edge technologies like the best EDR, endpoint detection and response technology out there. We also looked at some basic steps, logging. I think one of the things we found after SolarWinds is some of the federal logging practices were not what we would have hoped, which makes it hard to understand both what a victim did and what they took, and even if they're still on your systems. The last piece I touch on is efforts to improve federal incident response, particularly at the agency level and with the interagency, making sure we get the coordination we need. But another key piece of the EO, and coming from NIST, I'm detailed from NIST, that was important to me, was engagement with the private sector. There are a lot of new security baselines and standards that are in the executive order, and it's important that they are developed in partnership with the private sector. The private sector, I think, needs the government, and we need the private sector equally. So our hope is at the end of some of these public-private processes, we have cybersecurity standards, best practices that reflect the best thinking of the government and the private sector. Ultimately, we were quite pleased with where the executive order came out, but I'm even more pleased with what's happened in the, May to now, 5 months, 4 months since then, 5 months, I think. And I'm talking about the implementation efforts, because the best executive order, the best plan isn't worth very much if the implementation doesn't go well. So I particularly want to single out and thank the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, CISA, and NIST, who among the three of them have really carried the heavy load in implementing the EO. But also I want to thank private sector folks on the phone here who have engaged with CISA and with NIST, and I think also with OMB on some of the RFIs and the workshops to make sure that the elements that are being built out under the EO do reflect that private sector thinking I talked about. So I'll wrap up with one quick note. Lisa asked me to talk about why cybersecurity is important. And I tried to come up with a way to demonstrate that or to get at that. That was not the usual, because we all rely on it. And I'll answer with a bit of a story. As many of you know, in 2009 to 12, I was in the Hill working on what was then known as the Lieberman-Collins bill, the Comprehensive Cybersecurity. And one part of it was creating within the Department of Homeland Security cybersecurity-focused entity or agency. It sounds obvious now that we have CISA. Back then, it was a big debate. And one of the internal discussions that was pretty heated and took up a lot of time was whether this cyber entity would be cyber only or whether it would be responsible for both cyber and physical security. In the end, where the bill came out was cyber only because the consensus among some folks was that cyber was such a niche issue that it would be overwhelmed and ignored if it were paired with the physical security aspects. So if you fast forward to 2021, we have CISA. Cybersecurity is the first word in the agency. Is there anyone here who thinks that the cyber mission of CISA is somehow dwarfed or overshadowed by its physical security mission? I think a lot of people may not even realize that CISA has a significant and important responsibility for physical security as well. So that brings me back to the question of why does cybersecurity matter? The answer is in the world we live in today, cybersecurity is really everything security. Colonial showed us it's your gasoline. JBS showed us it's the food. I mean, Facebook last week showed us that cyber security or good cyber practices can impair your ability to get into your office and open your doors and ultimately slow down the entirety of the internet. So cyber is important because it touches everything we do nowadays. And the last thing I'll wrap with is I want to just echo some of the things that I heard Kirsten say earlier about the basics that everyone can do to improve their security. Last thought, just off the cuff, that I've talked about someone earlier today. I was thinking about this. What worries me the most, particularly if you wrap it into the importance of cybersecurity, is that the constant drumbeat of incidents and attacks will lead people to feel helpless, to think that there's nothing that they can do to secure either their businesses or themselves. And nothing is further from the truth. The reality is that the real cyber hygiene basics that Kirsten talked about, that Congresswoman Clark touched on, will provide security to the average American. You can make yourself secure. And it is important that as we spend this month focusing on cybersecurity, we emphasize the ability of individuals to secure their systems, to secure their personal data, and don't leave people with a concern that this is so prevalent that there's nothing they can do, which is where NCSA plays a big role. And we're really excited to be partnering with them here today and hope the rest of today's event goes well.
Thank you very much, Jeff. We certainly want people to feel empowered rather than helpless. And I really liked your comments about the executive order. Thank you for expanding on that. As you were speaking about building security in, it reminded me of my favorite Deming quote as an ex-auto industry person: we can't test quality into a product, right? And we can't test security into a software application or a product. So including security upstream, things like the software bill of materials, other things are mentioned in the executive order. So if you haven't read the executive order, I highly recommend it. It's got some great best practices in it for all businesses, not just those that are supplying the federal government right now. So thank you very much for joining us. I appreciate it. So next, we're going to be joined by Congresswoman Lauren Underwood. Might take us a minute to get her. She's provided us some remarks. It might take us a minute to get that video up.
Good afternoon and happy Cybersecurity Awareness Month. I'm Lauren Underwood and I proudly represent Illinois' 14th Congressional District. I want to thank the folks at NCSA for inviting me to be a part of this important and timely conversation about our whole of society approach to cybersecurity. The attacks we've seen recently and over the past year in particular have emphasized the urgent need to modernize our approach to securing our critical infrastructure. It's equally clear that strong partnerships between the public and private sectors are absolutely essential to that mission. Working across sectors and disciplines is the only way we're going to successfully defend against the evolving threats of today and tomorrow. I want to take this opportunity to highlight one critically important issue that has posed a challenge for government and industry alike, which is the urgent need to diversify our cybersecurity workforce. This is an issue I've been working on throughout my time in Congress. First, as a member of the Homeland Security Committee, where I chaired the Cybersecurity Subcommittee that my colleague, Chairwoman Yvette Clarke, now leads, and now as an appropriator on the Homeland Security Subcommittee. I want to be clear. Recruiting a diverse cybersecurity workforce is not a side project. It's a pressing national security imperative because a diverse security workforce truly makes us safer. Research has documented the many ways diverse teams of all kinds outperform homogeneous ones. And the armed forces have already identified the recruitment of a racially diverse officer corps as a mission-critical national security interest. That's why it's so alarming that just 1 in 4 cybersecurity professionals is a woman, 1 in 10 is Black, and 1 in 25 is Hispanic. Our cybersecurity workforce needs people of all different backgrounds and experiences because they each bring a perspective to the table that would otherwise be missing. Less diversity means more blind spots in our threat assessments and fewer creative ideas for solutions. And with the kind of attacks we've seen this year, those are risks we simply cannot afford to take. So I'm grateful for everyone who's taking time out of their day to help make our nation safer. And I want to invite our colleagues and partners in the private sector to join me in this mission. I am thrilled that Director Jen Easterly has taken the reins as the first woman to lead CISA, and I'm excited to support her efforts to diversify the agency and its leadership. But we're just at the start of this challenge, and there's so much more work to do. We need the private sector's innovation and leadership to develop new talent pipelines to recruit and train a world-class security workforce equal to the threats we face. So thank you for joining in today's discussion. I look forward to continuing this important work with all of your help. Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman Underwood, for those words, and thank you for your kind support of the National Cybersecurity Alliance. Next, we want to welcome Mr. Randy Vickers to the stage. He's the Chief Information Security Officer for the U.S. House of Representatives. Hello, Randy.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thank
Lisa,
you. How are you today?
Thank you and your team very much for allowing me to continue to be a part of Cybersecurity Awareness Month here on the Hill. I've been at the House for a little over 6 years, and every year I've been fortunate enough to be able to participate as someone providing remarks, a panelist. But I have a much longer history with Cybersecurity Awareness Month with DHS when I was the director of U.S. CERT prior to CISA being formed, and the growth of CISA is definitely a much needed improvement to their mission and their space, and I'm glad to see it. Been very fortunate to work with NCSA even prior to that, but it's been a great pleasure to be able to provide remarks today. Now, as it would seem pretty obvious, as a CISO of the House, I provide the oversight of security from an IT perspective across the mission of the House, and that mission is legislation, as seems pretty obvious. But a lot of the things that y'all teach today and y'all are talking about today, and that CISA provides, the information CISA provides, and the best practices in training and education, and the things that NCSA provides have been great products that we can modify to meet the House needs to be able to share cybersecurity awareness and cybersecurity best practices. We constantly are having monthly info sessions that we see great participation in, but having a partner and partners that can come in and talk to members and member offices, and the support we get from Representatives Clark and Underwood and Langevin and others, Representatives Liu, that really help provide that cyber focus, not only for this country, but within the House. We are constantly looking at ways to ensure that people do stop, think, and connect. And, whether it's on international travel or working remotely in district offices or from their homes, and how we have hybrid hearings and things like that, being able to provide a security posture for the House so they can execute that mission. A lot of those documents and training sessions that we have, we pull NCSA in. Pre-COVID, we were having sessions twice a year where we would open up a room and have people walk in, and NCSA was a key player in having a booth set up and sharing information to staff and anybody that would wander in. And for those folks that are on this call that work at the House, please champion the message. Think about the links that you're connecting. And I know, that main mission is talking to your constituents, finding ways to get their input for legislation. But we also need to understand phishing is still one of the primary ways that attacks happen. Ransomware comes in through phishing a lot of times. And, you know, it was brought up, the smishing comment about now it's hitting texts and on our phones. So, you know, the lifeblood at the house is email and mobile. And so please share the message that before you click on any link, know it's trusted, understand who it's coming from, and is it something you expect? And anything that's out of the norm, please reach out to my team to help, you know, review those things. But, you know, once again, it's a great opportunity to talk to various folks, seeing the chats that are happening with all these different discussions and the comments, raising awareness and raising the understanding of how important cyber is. And I agree with Mr. Green. It's not just about, you know, the ephemeral kind of piece that stuff crossing the network. It's about risk management, understanding the risk and knowing how that data and those systems that are needed to do business sit in that risk posture and be able to work in a smooth and efficient way. So I really look forward to the panel. So I don't want to take up too much of everyone's time. But thanks again, Lisa and Jennifer and others for the opportunity to once again participate in NCSA's support to the Hill. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. And we are definitely looking forward to working together in person again. The comment you made about modifying materials to fit the audience, you know, how you take some of the resources we provide and modify them. Everybody should feel free to do that. I think it's really important to speak the language of your audience. And all the materials that we provide are not protected by any sort of trademark or copyright, and everybody's welcome to use them as they see fit and edit them to fit your audience. But we look forward to working together again in person. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So as Randy mentioned, next up is our panel discussion that I've really been looking forward to this week. We had a nice lively prep call, so that tells me it's going to be a lively panel. I think a lot of us are webinared to death at this point in COVID, and but we're going to definitely provide some insight and some interesting conversation with you today. I'm joined by Kate Charlotte, Director of Data Governance for Google, and Darren Show, Head of Technology for Norton LifeLock. Thank you very much both for being with us today.
Thanks, Lisa. Great to be here.
Thanks, Lisa.
So let's jump right in. Kate, the first question is for you. Public-private sector approaches have been a growing conversation in cybersecurity, and in fact, that's our main topic today. What are these approaches? Where are these approaches needed, and how are they addressing the pressing concerns in cybersecurity, such as ransomware, which was talked about earlier, and supply chain security, like SolarWinds, which was also mentioned earlier today?
Yep. Yeah, well, first of all, Lisa, thanks for having me. It's such a dynamic month in conversation. As you said, it's the Super Bowl, and I think I see a microcosm of that in our chat here. A lot of activity, and just goes to show the importance of the conversation. And I've seen that sitting from my perch in the federal government years back, as well as now in industry. I think we heard a lot of compelling perspectives on the threats and what we need to do, how everybody can be more secure. How cyber threats are becoming more brazen and impactful in reaching people and individuals in their day-to-day lives even more, and all the shared responsibilities we have to deal with them. And so it strikes me as really true what President Biden said when he said that the federal government needs the partnership of every American and every American company, or when Jen Easterly said collaboration needs to be in our DNA. All of these things are really true if we're going to make a meaningful improvement here. And when we think about public and private collaboration, it really needs to be stretched across the security lifecycle. So that includes in things like threat detection, sharing insights and information on cyber threats, which there are different kind of pieces of information that we all have depending on where we sit. It comes in the form of response, where we figure out how to respond to incidents together. Although, as Jeff said, always trying to move from just the response piece of this to the prevention and security piece of it. It's best practices and exchanging the insights. So in the private sector, having insights, whether it's in threats or in best practices, we can really kind of contribute that into a conversation with the federal government, or it comes in the form of tools and investments where we can get together and talk about next generation security tools and people. And I think that, you talked about supply chain and ransomware, and that was very high on the list of, the discussion just previously too. Both of those are really good examples for where collaboration is needed. When it comes to supply chain security, just as an example, you see the US government's pushing to secure software development practices. I think that could bring about more progress really than we've seen on this issue in years. And it's, the collaboration is really, really ripe. So you've got NIST, you've got the Commerce Department and NTIA releasing guidelines on different facets of this. NIST is working to create a new framework for security and the integrity of the supply chain. And wherever private sector has expertise to bring into that discussion, we should share that knowledge. We should be exchanging and learning from each other. So for Google, for example, has been using a end-to-end framework for our own secure software development for the last 8+ years or so. It's a mandatory process for our security, for our software development. And it's been really instrumental in making our products secure by default. So we think it's a really responsibility to help adapt that into a framework that works for more people. We've put forward an idea called SALSA that we think could really raise the bar for the software ecosystem. And then just I'll say on ransomware quickly, because we can dive in and have a discussion on this rather than me just talking at you guys. But the USG bringing 30 countries on this together, that's a lever that only governments can pull, right? Pulling together the international community, and companies have insights on that threat as well as defensive techniques. So just like examples of why these things really are ripe and essential for collaboration across all these areas.
And Lisa, can I just highlight something that Kate said? And she said so many things wonderfully there, but maybe two things that I want to build on that she said and others have said earlier in today's presentations. And one of them was that need to tackle this as a team sport. I really like that analogy. And one of the things I just want to dive one layer deeper on with that is that when we act together, whether it's in the public sector, whether it's in the private sector, or whether it's all of us just as people in our daily lives, together we actually can see broader and further. And that's essential in combating this kind of evolving threat landscape, whether it's ransomware today, whether it's phishing today, or whether it's the threat that's over the horizon. And I think that's going to be a huge part of how we can really kind of bring resolution to some of these issues, because they're only growing in importance.
I totally agree. Thank you for that. The White House recently gathered the private sector to discuss bolstering the nation's cybersecurity. How is the private sector working with not only the White House, but the Hill and federal government agencies on cybersecurity? And one of the things that I was thinking about earlier today, I think it was Representative Clark who mentioned that we have, I can't think of a more pertinent issue in this country right now where we do have bipartisan support than cybersecurity. Everybody is aligned on this. So with that in mind, how is the private sector working together with the Hill and federal government agencies?
Yeah. Well, I think it's been a real call to action, whether both in the sense of JBS, Colonial Pipeline, SolarWinds. All of these have shown how vulnerable our society is to the threats, and you see these enormous impact assessments, right? Whether that's going back to NotPetya or predictions that SolarWinds will have a $100 billion remediation So it's really right of the government to use this moment to call on agencies and call on companies and partners to make it that shared responsibility. I think to your question, the collaboration really does have to stretch across all branches of government and in multi-stakeholder industry forums too. President Biden pulled together key CEOs. Google CEO Sundar Pichai joined him to talk about it. But I think the key there is having that absolute senior most executive attention is just, I've seen it throughout my time in the federal government and other that it is vital to getting the traction and the energy on the work here. And that needs to just continue to keep the focus there. But a lot of the critical work also happens at the level of the federal agencies. I think Jeff and was giving shout outs to DHS and OMB and NIST in particular. But then the Hill has critical legislative work that they have to give voice to these issues through hearings, which there have been a number of that have really shed a lot of light on how key stakeholders think is the way forward, and opening that conversation there, as well as regulation and academia, by the way, critical here too. So,
Darren, thought you'd like to share?
No, I couldn't agree more with Kate. I think it's fantastic that we have these kind of these working partnerships. And I think kind of the biggest thing is we're pleased to see increasing action here, right? So because it directs energy and it directs attention to what's a problem. Lisa, you said it yourself. You said this is one of the more important things that were agreed upon. And look, the American public and the world at large are facing kind of two pandemics here. One is in the physical realm, and the other one is in the digital realm, and both are extremely important. It's a kind of a double whammy to anybody just trying to live and get by.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. Yeah, and unfortunately, I think one has fueled the other because of the stress that people have been under with the pandemic. When we're under stress, I think we're a lot more susceptible to social engineering.
Of course.
And one has just fueled the other. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and that goes exactly to what we're talking about with ransomware and phishing, right? They're basically an attack on the human operating system, which is a heck of a lot harder to patch, and is something that's more difficult to safeguard there. So yeah, we're really taking advantage of it.
That's our job at the National Cybersecurity Alliance is trying to patch humans. Yeah. So Jeff talked about the executive order earlier. Many of us are very familiar with it. Again, I'm going to put in a plug. If you haven't read it, please read it. So that executive order was issued by the White House in May, improving the nation's cybersecurity. We've seen several cyber-related bills introduced on the Hill. What was the private sector's reaction to the EO and to these legislations?
Happy to jump in on that, Lisa, because it kind of goes to what we were just talking about when you were asking me comments on it. I think we're all pleased to see the White House take aggressive action towards addressing the cybersecurity risk for the nation's infrastructure and as well as the government infrastructure. From my point of view, and speaking as a technologist that's focused on consumer-focused cybersecurity, we'd like to work with policymakers on the risks and also the potential damage to consumers globally from an increased occurrences that they're encountering. For instance, we know that $45 billion is lost, $45 billion yearly from cybersecurity related events, whether that's identity theft, fraud, we talked about phishing, we talked about ransomware attacks, and on and on. And the risk for consumers is extremely high, potentially devastating, and needs to be a part of kind of all these discussions that we're having right now, and then furthermore into the everyday kind of thought process and conversation process.
Yeah, it's an enormous tax on the world economy, but I think for the average consumer, it's kind of a death by 1,000 cuts because you don't sort of feel it in the way.
You may not feel it. You may not know someone else who's experienced it yet. And one of the other things is the harm may actually come sometime in the future, right?
Right.
If I nick my finger while prepping dinner on a knife, I feel it right away. But if I click on a phishing link, I might not know about it until I get, a 1099-G in the mail that wasn't mine or something like
Yeah,
that.
it's what we in marketing call abstract and remote. It's an abstract threat and it's remote. It may happen in the future, it may not. So I think that's one of the rules that we live by at the National Cybersecurity Alliance is trying to explain it in terms that make it a little more tangible and immediate without using a lot of FUD, without using a lot of fear.
Right.
Kate, any thoughts on that topic?
Yeah, just I mean on the cybersecurity EO, obviously a really welcome development, and as Darren said, it's aggressive and it's also achievable, right? That's always the challenge in some of these, is setting out the really like hard, aggressive goals, but also having it be something that you can make very concrete progress on, and folks know the next steps, and they hit a nice approach there. I also think that some of the legislation that we've seen coming through is, really does kind of get to and push forward the mindset of thinking about cybersecurity holistically. To Jeff was talking about how everybody wanted to separate cyber because it was such a niche area. They thought it would get subsumed by the physical aspects of it. And we've if we haven't learned that now, it's every time it gets kind of hit over the head, cybersecurity can't be thought of as separately. It has to be integrated into any work to deliver modern and resilient systems. When we're thinking about foreign policy, for example, and relationships with other nation states, for example, it's got to be integrated into the thinking about that relationship. So seeing good things about that mindset as well coming out of the Hill.
So let's pivot a minute and talk about another major topic that we've touched on earlier today, and that's the so-called workforce gap. How is the industry making progress on addressing the gap between the number of jobs available and the lack of job seekers, and how can the public sector help?
Yeah, I can jump off, and I mentioned Darren has a lot of good ideas here too. There are so many facets to this question and to the problem that go beyond, I think, just the number of people in jobs, and the skill sets and the training are a big piece, but we have to really think about it holistically. And I think that's why it also makes workforce a prime area for public-private collaboration, because we all have these different levers that we can pull, whether it's in academia or government or the private sector. We heard Kirsten and earlier Jen Easterly at Black Hat laying out focus areas on K-12 or K-to-Gray. I liked that one. And digital skilling, kind of scaling in and out of government, and building up underserved communities in this space. When we joined the summit with President Biden, we committed to training 100,000 Americans on key in-demand skills like data privacy and security. They get industry recognized, they get supported career certificates, and has a positive impact on some of the graduates' career impact. But that's great. I think it's also, to my point earlier, goes beyond the numbers and beyond these facets to think about it not just as a matter of training. Google's CISO, Phil Venables, has done some thoughtful writing on this, where you think about the challenge across all the kind of the life cycle, and you're looking at things like the productivity of cyber professionals, to the organizational design of your cybersecurity and IT organizations, to how do you tap latent talent in non-obvious places? How do you reduce the demand on the people who are actually in the seats already and the talent that we already have by securing your products more by default, so they're not spending all their time doing small tasks? They can be reserved for the bigger tasks. And so I think there's a lot that we can do in this space if we think creatively and don't just feel limited to kind of the questions around the numbers. And then, I think Representative Underwood did an amazing job noting the importance of diverse teams. They do make better products. They're more innovative. And so when we do our training, we try to, tap into underserved backgrounds. We've got more than half of our graduates come from those backgrounds. And I have to put in a plug for our Share the Mic in Cyber work. That is an organization founded by my colleague Camille Stewart and Lauren Zabierek at Harvard's Belfer Center. And it really elevates the voices and expertise of Black cyber practitioners. And I think we all need to take accountability for making efforts like that successful, and recommend that you look them up. Share the Mic in Cyber.
That is a great effort. Yeah.
Lisa, sorry, go ahead. I was going to cut that on something. Oh, well, Kate mentioned two things I maybe want to just kind of give my own thoughts on as well. One was she was talking about tapping, I think her phrase was latent talent. And 20 some years ago, I was not in cybersecurity. I was really interested in drumming. I had like a 5-piece drum set, and that was kind of where, you know, I spent my time and energy. And if you think about it, 20 some years ago was right around Y2K. And that was one of the big crises that we had kind of from an industry perspective, but we were wondering how things were going to happen. We had a labor shortage. And I remember hearing that call and thinking, well, geez, what do I, you know, someone who's more interested in music have to do with this? And yet that was exactly who was being targeted. They were reaching out to artists, musicians, people that weren't, you know, exactly in the field of doing assembly level programming or things like that. And one of the things I heard in that messaging that went out really broadly was the way that musicians think, the way that other people that are not classically trained in computer science might think could still have many benefits to this, right? Whether you're a mathematician, a physicist, a musician, all of those bring the requisite skills to think about a problem, to be creative about a problem, to structure a solution for that. And so I just want to double down on what Kate was saying. There's talent everywhere, and we want to harness it to put it on the most important problems. The second thing I think is really around this notion of what scales. Technology, we're really, especially, you know, being a technologist and several like Kate also being from a technology company, we often focus on how we can scale it, because that's one of the greatest things about machines, and you know, whether it's AI or whether it's a machine, it really doesn't matter. It has this property of scale that is really important. And when you bring it to a problem, you can have an idea that happens, you know, across the world, solve a problem everywhere all at once. That's good and bad. On the other hand, humans also can scale, but it happens in a little bit different manner, right? Human scaling and machine scaling have a little bit of difference. And for a long time, the folks in my labs we'd focus on how can we replace, you know, certain, you know, human activities, whether it's maybe being in a SOC or something, with AI. What we learned over many years was maybe that wasn't the right approach. Maybe we could really augment people better. Maybe we could give them really powerful tools that gave them X-ray vision, that helped them do their job more productively. I think that is another kind of area that's really emerging and shows a lot of promise here. So yes, we need more people. We can open the funnel to more diverse talent. And then if we give them the tools with that view in mind, I think we can really make a positive dent in the labor shortage here, and then ultimately tackle the problem.
Yeah, I'd like to put a plug in here too for growing talent. I think it's been sort of the running joke on LinkedIn lately that people see job descriptions
Have to grow it.
that mean that if you had all the skills and abilities that were listed in that job description, you'd be over 100 years old.
Yeah.
So I think I hear from people trying to break into the industry, and they're actually having a difficult time doing it because maybe they don't have specific cybersecurity related experience, but that doesn't mean they can't learn. And
doesn't mean they can't learn, and we have to reach out to them.
Exactly. Yeah. I think there's a call to action, not just for chief security officers everywhere, but for HR professionals and recruiters to be looking for the right sort of mindset and thinking, and the right sort of talent that you can grow yourself in-house. People all develop over time. And so looking for people with potential, I think, is just as important as maybe those roles you have where you're looking for somebody that's more experienced. We've got to come up with better solutions to the problem, because we're just not going to catch up. The deficit is too large for us to catch up without getting more creative, as you said, too.
Yeah, and I think thinking about it at all age levels and groupings. I mean, so even just at the very early stages, setting the foundations for STEM knowledge and new educational materials at younger ages, to certifications, but even beyond getting certifications, how do you keep people growing and advancing in their career and show them that continued trajectory. If they come in with the basic skill set, how do you move them towards the advanced skill set? And so I think you've got to really like look at all ages here.
Yeah, and back to your point about share the mic, the more we use imagery of males in hoodies, the less appealing the field is. I think all the cliched images that are out there, the stuff people see in movies and on television, the preconceived notions that they have of what it means to be in cybersecurity, that's really alienating to a lot of people that have creative skills, people that don't look like the hacker in the hoodie. I think we just need to think twice about, especially in the media, about the imagery and the language that we use to talk about security and the profession of people in security.
Yeah, Hewlett Foundation did some really good and interesting work on trying to draw in like new perspectives on new graphics and really modernize it, make it more accessible, make it less tired, make it more diverse and
Yep.
inclusive. It's so important to be able to reach people on that on a more kind of emotional and less tired level,
Yep.
And to help them understand what cybersecurity, I can't remember if it's Kirsten was talking about, what does cyber mean in as a definition, that it's still pretty abstract to people. So
Right.
how can you use visuals to draw them in and make them interested in a way that it doesn't, again, just feel like this.
We need more marketing
niche.
people to fix that problem.
Yeah.
We need everybody to help fix that problem.
Yeah.
But, it's interesting. I was just listening to this and, my wife is a physician, and I remember just talking to her, how did she decide to become a doctor? And it was a simple answer. And it came to her when she was 5 years old. It was, I saw other people helping other people. And that seemed like a really good use of my time in my life. I think when people think about cyber, whether we call it cyber or not, and they think about a mission that matters, about work that matters, all that imagery you talked about is really important. But if I can help, explain what we do, as Kate explains what she does, and Lisa, what you guys are doing about your mission, and we talk about helping people, there is really no greater gift of your time in this world than helping someone else. And that's important. My wife also was leading our Girl Scout troop last night. And by the way, it's great because Secretary Mayorkas mentioned this, and I think it was his May or March speech. And he was talking to the CEO of the Girl Scouts, and they created, I think it was 18 different badges for cybersecurity skills.
Palo Alto
right?
Networks. Yes.
Yeah. And Palo Alto Networks helped. And so that's a great industry partnership. We also helped from NortonLifeLock in thinking about those skills. And for the younger generation, one of the things that struck me about what the CEO, she said, is it wasn't us going and saying that the girls had to have this, right? It was a response to the girls saying, we want it. We want to learn how to be safe. We want to learn how to keep our families safe. That's really interesting. That's a mindset shift that we can tap into. And that would be amazing if we can get more of that.
Yeah, totally agree. So speaking a little bit more about the average human being, do these initiatives help individual victims of cybercrime? All the things that we've talked about across the board today, how does that help a victim? What resources are out there for victims?
Yeah, and I think it's a really great phrasing to call attention to the word victim, because I think we often focus on the technology, whether it's the techniques, right? Ransomware, phishing, and those are important. But the other aspect is really who's involved. There's an attacker, that's a person, and there's a victim, that's a person. Could be you, could be your next door neighbor, could be a family member. And so all the things that we're thinking about here have to actually help protect someone against someone else. And I think that also goes back to our discussion about work that matters, right? And so anything that we do to create more secure infrastructure, to me, I think that translates to better safety. And the easiest way for me to interpret it is, look, better roads, better engineering means fewer car accidents, means fewer broken families. I know it's a little bit dramatic, but I think anytime we call attention and energy will also drive increased innovation, whether it's seatbelts, and that's a common analogy, or whether it's like two-way radios. That was, as I understand it, invented more for rescuers and firefighters and police and the military. And then you think about how that's trickled down into the consumers in the form of our cell phones and our smartphones. So anytime we can focus on creating better infrastructure and better things that make everyday people's lives easier, is going to help naturally reduce the number of victims and help them feel like there's more trust in what they can do to live online. And not worry about all the bad things as much. There's so few parts of my everyday experience that I'm worried about walking into the wrong part of something or feeling unsafe. And so much of my day is really about feeling empowered and thinking, yeah, I can go outside, I can do something that's great. And I want cyberspace to feel exactly that way. And everybody deserves that, whether in the city, rural, it doesn't matter, anywhere in the world.
I completely agree. We need to focus on empowerment. Yeah. Kate, anything to add there?
Yeah, and when I think about this question, when I think about empowerment, I guess two things come to mind. And one is security by default, more security by default. We need to have products that people don't have to think about in order to do the thing that is secure, that come in as more secure and easy. And the other thing I think about with empowering people is around transparency. So I know there's been conversations in Solarium and other places about so-called nutrition labels and figuring out how to raise transparency of security in products that people buy. We should continue having those conversations to figure out what is the kind of transparency that actually reaches people, that that resonates and is useful, right? On the Play Store, we are developing a section for apps where app developers can share more information on their security practices, like whether they're using data encryption. And so I think that's transparency and making and not just giving a lot of information, but making it easily digestible and accessible and easy to understand is really the responsibility that governments and companies have to be able to help those folks as individuals.
That's really good to hear about that on Play Store. I think that's fantastic. So we've talked a lot today about best practices over the course of the session. Things like creating long passphrases, using multi-factor authentication, all those good things. How can the public and private sectors convince people to do this, convince users to actually use best practices like, password managers and multi-factor authentication and all the different, running your updates, all the different things that we've talked about today?
Yeah, and maybe I could jump in here, Lisa and Kate. When we survey, Americans and globally, worldwide, when we're talking about their concerns, 77% of them are saying they've taken more precautions online. So that's a great start. They're becoming more aware of the problem and they want to do it. Now, the downside is 2 in 5 still tell us they don't know how to protect themselves. And so I think that's kind of what's underscoring there's a lot more work to be done to enable both businesses, but in my case, I'm focused on the consumers, to take control of their own cyber safety. And I often feel it's not about telling them what to do, more about helping them think about how to make the best decisions. We talk about looking at something about clicking. I don't want to just tell them not to click everything. I want them to feel empowered to click what they want to get the job done, whether it's work or whether it's education, or whether it's health. And it's kind of on us to figure out, how do we give them the tools? How can I give them the awareness? How can I help them make decisions that are best for them? That's going to bring that confidence to live their digital lives more fully. I don't want this to be something where the public service announcement is just scare tactics, right? We've all participated in that. I'm guilty of that as well. Instead, I think what it has to be is, how can we get over this over dramatized, you mentioned the hoodies aspect, where, and maybe especially for the younger generation, I don't know someone who's been personally affected in the way that some of the other demographics have been. How can I get them interested in that? If we get them interested, if we get them passionate about how they can protect themselves and their family, that's going to go a long way to getting this started. And then we give them the tools, then we give them the actions that they can take themselves.
Start with why, get them hooked. Yeah. The research that I mentioned earlier that's supported by CISA that we did this year together with a company called CyberSafe in the UK has a lot of information in it on people's attitudes and their beliefs, that they find cybersecurity intimidating, they can find it frustrating, but they all, by and large, people say it is a priority for them. But then when they try to actually make decisions, the information isn't as clear as it could be. We don't necessarily always speak to them in those encouraging tones, right? We use the hacker and the hood, things like that. So again, that's available on StaySafeOnline.org. We've called the report "Oh Behave" because it's all about behavioral science. And you can find that on our social channels and on our website. There's a lot of good data in there about that. Kate, Google recently announced it will start auto-enrolling users in two-factor authentication. This is music to my ears. I love to hear this. And especially because our data spoke so loud and clear, I mentioned it earlier, that there's a bunch of people that don't know what MFA is. They find it intimidating. We haven't named it something like quick and easy security tool. we named it MFA, which goes, points to that feeling of frustration that people have or intimidating.
I love that. Quick and easy, kind of like USB thingamajig that we plug in.
We were selling something. We'd be,
yes.
we were marketers. We would call it.
No, you're right. You're right.
But that data shows that by and large, when people start to use it, 90% of them keep using it. So if we could just get over our fear of a little bit of user friction, which it sounds like Google is doing, and prioritizing security over that tiny bit of friction, but because once we get people over that hump, they're going to keep using it. So tell me a little bit more about that and what the reaction has been to that announcement, because I would love to see more technology companies follow Google in that direction.
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. And I think as we heard from almost everybody on this panel, it's such a basic yet effective tool, and that's why it's one of the top priorities of the government, and we certainly have it on our list as well. And it's also more important than ever. I was struck by recent studies that people created on average 15 new accounts during the pandemic. That is a lot of passwords, and our research has shown that 66% of people reuse passwords across multiple accounts, which if it's compromised, then
so does ours
to more impact. And so while passwords are the first line of defense for our digital lives, they also bring a lot of challenges. Password managers obviously help with that. We're trying to build towards a password-free future. But in general, we all know that having a second form of authentication dramatically decreases an attacker's chance of success. And by the way, this is especially so when you use phishing-resistant methods. So for example, at Google, our use of physical security keys has effectively eliminated successful phishing on employees. We've built security keys right into Android phones to make them even easier to use. And as we feed into some of these conversations about multi-factor authentication and zero trust environments in federal agencies, we've kind of been feeding in some of that insight. But more to your question about the announcement, one of the things we've learned is keep our people safe, make our products secure by default. And that also means turning on security protections by default. And that's what we're doing with this announcement. It has to be convenient too. So we've worked really hard to make it simple, so the friction is minimal, so that the benefit is clear, and we've communicated what that benefit is. So it's a win-win. And once you get them over that hump of that first initial friction, then they tend to stick with it. And so, so far the reaction has been very positive. A goal is to get everybody in a more protected and secure state. We didn't do it for everybody. We did it for the folks that have the backup capability and kind of the ability set up in their account to navigate it. But hopefully we'll grow and grow that set of folks that we can turn it on for. And just like, by the way, this is also public-private collaboration, right? The Cybersecurity EO required federal agencies to move to multi-factor authentication. And a lot of folks in industry have been engaged in conversations about those standards and how to do that effectively. So it's yet another area where we work together.
So that's a great example of public-private cooperation that's working. What else is working, and what isn't? What else needs to be done to have more of that public-private partnership?
I can start off, and I'm sure Darren has ideas too. I mean, I think some of it is routinizing and making it consistent, and what Jenny Sterling said, collaboration being in your DNA. I just think we all have to get used to it, and we have to know each other. We have to develop personal relationships. Some of that's happening now through DHS's Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, although I know they wanted to call it ACDC. It's JCDC. And I think you literally get people in a room together, and you work it out, and you develop the relationships that are necessary to make it routine.
Darren, thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa.
Working, what else could we be doing? What more could we be doing?
Well, look, I think it's all about focus on people. The individual, a person, your parent, your neighbor is at the heart of everything we're really seeking to protect here, right? I think we can all agree on that. And they're both the biggest asset and the biggest opportunity to tackle this problem. And it's kind of weird coming from a technologist such as myself, but I'm going to say technology is important. It's necessary. It's going to help. It's not sufficient. I recall early days in phishing. I've been this for over 2 decades. I remember when we were training people to avoid phishing, but we were talking about the padlock icon shown in the browser. And we were talking about certificates. And that's a complicated thing for any of us to understand, whether or not you have a PhD in computer science, to think about, yeah, okay, that means the traffic is encrypted. Let me explain encryption. And it's almost like getting like the first time I got a 4-wheel drive, I got a Jeep, and I was like, wow, I can go drive in a blizzard now. And in many cases you can, but it can also provide a bit of a sense of security that might be false. And so what I was concerned about, and what our labs measured, was that these days we see 85% of all phishing websites using a certificate. So the user's getting that padlock, that green padlock in many cases, up in that browser. I want to make sure that we're not just training people to look for signals that are going to be changing over time. That's what's really difficult and different about this problem, is technology changes so fast, and that's a great thing. And we're going to have to really take some new approaches to how we educate, how we protect people, to make sure that we're really giving them the fundamental understanding of what they need to safeguard themselves against, what tools they can use, and those tools are going to evolve probably very quickly, and how they themselves participate in kind of, I'll give you an example, like neighborhood watch-like programs that happen at global scale so they can protect themselves and protect others. So I guess if there's one thing I could say to take away from this, is that we got to focus more on people. And that's the only way we're going to create a brighter future for everybody.
Yep, completely agree. We're going to open it up to questions now. And we've had one person who's in the chat asking about SMBs, small and medium-sized businesses. How do you reach small businesses to become more aware of cybersecurity programs, just basic hygiene, and also compliance frameworks? What resources are available for SMBs? We have plenty on our website on StaySafeOnline.org.
We have so much. I don't know who wants to go first. Kate, would you like to start first? And I'll go for it.
Go for it.
Okay, sure. So, look, I think when we talk about whether it's very small businesses, small to medium businesses, or large enterprises, one of the things that probably comes to mind is the resources available. Large enterprises typically have access to internal programs, have large compliance teams, and have the budget, frankly, to do that. And my wife runs a very small business, a VSB. And so how does she have, for herself and her friends and her employees, her suppliers, her contractors, that same thing? Well, I think, what we're seeing in the chat, I'm trying to monitor it too. That's why I see my eyes shifting back and forth every now and then, is some of those links that are provided by the partners here. That's great partnership. I think there's even more that's going to come down the road as a lot of the private sectors take what they've learned from creating for themselves and creating for others, the very large enterprise space, and making sure that can be adopted by just about anybody, right? That's a start. And then if you think about the technology, again, large enterprises benefit from things like managed EDR, which started, by the way, as non-managed EDR. So it's just EDR, then became managed EDR. I think with the advent of technology, one of the game changers for me would be, how can I bring that same level of detection, prevention, protection and response, and automate that to the sense that whether you're a very small business, a small business, or just a consumer, because I am the IT staff in my house. My wife and I, and my daughter too, to that extent, she's probably better than I am at this point. How can we have all the tools that everybody else has? That's what I meant by the scale of technology that can help scale humans, right? It's the beauty of these things where what was once a tool that was available only to a few can be the tool of the many. And in the decades that have happened, this only gets faster and cheaper and better. I really believe that this can be accessible for everybody.
Yeah, we, like everyone, have offerings kind of directed and tailored for small and medium businesses. But I also think, we've got online checklist, a security checklist for small businesses. If you want to check that out, I would say just Google, security checklist for small businesses. That helps run through a number of best practices and kind of points you in the direction of a number of other resources that we have. It's a really critical sector and audience, because the vast majority of businesses that need a lot of these capabilities are in that category.
We have about 30 seconds for one quick question. So I'm going to limit you each to one phrase. Will the CMMC drive a minimum baseline for security? Who wants to take that? And maybe you should say what CMMC stands for. My answer is yes, eventually. What do you guys think?
That is not my area, so I'm going to answer I don't know, and instead just say I see a lot of questions also in the chat about digital skilling and education. And so anybody who's interested should go to grow.google. And that's a resource for folks to get certification and skilling.
I'll take a big step back and say we have to drive a minimum baseline for security. And I would even say we can't even call it security. It's got to be safety. Safety is an emotion. Security is like concrete walls and barbed wire. I want to drive a minimum baseline for how my daughter, my family, my neighbors feel going forward. That's the goal. We have to achieve it. There is no other option.
Yep, completely agree. Well, thank you, Darren and Kate. And thanks to all of our speakers today for taking the time to share your remarks with us. Thank you, NortonLifeLock and Google, for making today's event possible as our sponsors. A recording of this webinar will be available on our website and YouTube within the next few hours. You can visit our website, StaySafeOnline.org, and follow us on social media for more information about Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Please sign up to be a champion on our site and all of our other upcoming events. Thank you all for joining us today. Stay safe online.
Thank you very much.